Where were we? Okay, so
So they
yeah,
allowed the sisters were dispersing.
all
Yeah.
the sisters, but it was very difficult because the British made a law that is called the white, called the white plan, whichever that it was meant they can only allow 10,000 Jews to come to Israel in a year. Now you can imagine if you have, I don't know, 100,000 Jews, how many years it will take to them to come. So my Aunt Selma, for instance, from Haifa, Eitan's mom, uh, came overnight. She came through, first of all, she learned a few words in Hebrew. So if the British catch her, they'll think maybe she is a native Israeli. And she came near Tel Aviv in the boat, in a small boat they came, and they couldn't even land in the ground. They had to be brought by guys who took them. With one suitcase she came, and suddenly overnight, my aunt Selma shows up in Tel Aviv when my mother already was there. So that was an unbelievable story because she didn't even know that where her sister is.
Oh wow.
Nobody knew nothing. And so my dad's still in Switzerland, skiing and all that. And then he said, okay, I want to go to Palestine. And he had a few papers from the teachers who said he's very good and all that. But the British said, haha, you need to have your regular papers when he came to Palestine. And what did they do to him? They stuck him in jail. But I'll tell you later what happened to him in jail. It was an unbelievable story. Really unbelievable. Meanwhile, my grandparents still stayed there. The only one who stayed with them was my older aunt, Elsie. She's the one who wrote the documents here. She said that we had a history of the family for hundreds of years, but because of the Nazis, everything disappeared. So she did it everything by own recollection. And she had a good memory, but no, that's all she had. So she stayed with my grandparents. My grandparents then were transported to a place in between Poland. They were taken overnight. They were taken near Poland and near the border in the mud and everything. There was no food. My grandfather was shot or killed there. My grandmother and my aunt Elsie, uh, they 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 ran away together.
What was your grandmother's name?
That was my aunt Elsie and her husband
Mm-hmm.
Fred,
Mm-hmm. I remember them.
and my dad and my no, my dad already went to Switzerland, to Palestine, and so they so Elsie and Fred and took the grandmother, took Rivka. In the document it says RIVK, but there in the document that you'll find that I send you, her name was Rivka, RYFKA, and then later on that you can read.
And that's
what
your grandmother?
That's my grandmother, and she's and my cousin and my cousin. She's named after. I have many relatives that named Rivka because of her, and so she took them. They all went and ran away to. They stopped in Brussels, Belgium, which is near Germany. And in Brussels, everybody was running to the war. It's hard to believe, hundreds of thousands of people staying there in the train station, everybody trying to run away from the Germans at that time. And so my Elsie their plan to go to Switzerland, not too far. They had all kind of false papers, and they had some money to give. So that was the plan. The plan was to get to Switzerland. The grandmother, Rivka, Fred, Elsie, just them. And what happened in the train station, there was another train supposed to come near, that brings them near the Swiss border. But what happened? In that commotion, they lost the grip of, my Aunt Elsie lost her mother. She couldn't find her anymore. In other words, there was such a commotion that although she held her hand, that's it. I mean, she disappeared. So they had to make a choice. What were we going to do? They had to take the train. And Elsie was able to somehow, very difficult way to get to Switzerland. And even in Switzerland, the Swiss many times would send them back. But there they kept them in a camp.
A refugee camp.
Yeah. And my Aunt Elsie never forgave herself for letting her grandmother. I mean, that was the biggest tragedy in her life, that she...
Yeah.
Meanwhile, what happened to the grandmother? So you have from Ruti document what happened to the grandmother. For a long time she was able to escape, and she actually was able to escape to France. And she was like 4 years in France before remember that France at that time was part was pro-Nazi, and part was against. So many times the French would just give the names of all the people that are Jewish to the Germans. And so we don't know exactly, but all the Jews at that time that were in France pretty much were transported
I didn't know that.
to be killed, yeah. And so we have the documents that you see that for 4 years she survived until finally all we know, we have her name, we have a document, where was her last stop. It mentions the name of the last stop, and from there she wound up and was killed. Exactly the place we don't know exactly. So that's the story of Rivka. Now I'll tell you about my dad. And so my dad comes to Palestine, and the British says, "Hey, Mr. Coppel, where are all your documents?" I said, "How can I give you documents? I'm running away from the Nazis. I don't have any documents. All I have is my education and my recommendation from Switzerland, from the rabbis, whatever." And they said, "Well, that's not good enough." Well, they stuck my dad in jail, but not in jail in Israel. They put him in jail in near Cairo, in Alexandria, Egypt.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so here he's in jail.
In Egypt.
In Egypt. And he's scared stiff. They stuck him with Sudanese, like Elijah one. I don't know if you remember the guy who used to be playing basketball, like 7 feet something. And not only were they dark, they were so dark that he was scared of them because they were huge. Some of them were criminals. And my dad said, all he could see is their white teeth. He was afraid they'll eat him for breakfast or something. So it was really not too long after that, the warden comes to my dad. He says, "Oh, Mr. Coppel, I see that you used to play chess in a club." I guess my dad had some papers. "Why don't you come to my office and we'll play chess?" Now, the warden was, I don't know if he was Irish with a kilt or not. I don't remember that, or Scottish. And so he brings my dad to his office. It was a big office, big table, and my dad starts playing with him chess, and so on and so forth. I don't know the results of the game, but suddenly my dad says, "Hey, you see this picture? Is that your family picture?" And the guy said, "Yes." And he said, "See this guy there? I was skiing with him in Switzerland. We became friends for a few days." And the guy started crying. So it so happened that that guy was killed in an accident, in a ski accident. Here is my dad gives him the last story about his own son. So he started crying really. And he said, "Tomorrow I'm bringing you to the train and you go to Tel Aviv. Which happened, and the guy went and gave him the whole month's salary. I don't remember if it was free, if it was 30 British pounds or whatever. It was all his money that he had for a month. And he gave it to my dad. My dad didn't have a penny, so that's all he had. We brought him in a train. At that time, you could take a train all across Sinai. It's like the old Turkish railroad system and whatever. And this is how my dad got to Tel Aviv. No place to sleep yet. He slept on the beach.
By way of a jail in Cairo.
Huh?
By way of a jail in
Yeah.
Cairo.
But it's unbelievable about the story that happened. I mean, what coincidence can that happen? Okay, it was really unreal. Okay, meanwhile, my mother, she went to the Germans, and she said, I want to go to Palestine. And she had the French papers, so they said, well, why do you want to go to Palestine? Well, she gave them some story. I'm going to come, I'll be back, I'm going to visit. And so she didn't have a problem to come to Palestine. I don't know how they married, how they actually got together, but Tel Aviv was a very small city at that time, 1933. My sister Judy already was born in 1934. Yeah.
So they found
that
each
was
other
quick.
quickly.
Huh?
They found each other quickly.
They found each other quickly, and it was very difficult for my mother. She came from a very spoiled home, and there was a woman that took care of them. Her name was Marie, and my Aunt Elsie was looking for this Marie. She loved this French woman, could never find this Marie. What happened to her, where she is, or nothing. But we tried, and so it was difficult in the beginning. She from a spoiled home. My mother had to be like babysitting and do all kind of other jobs. And the weather, she didn't like the weather in Israel. Coming from a nice, cool place like Minnesota,
To the desert.
huh?
To the desert.
To the desert. It was a desert for her. She
Yeah.
couldn't. Really hard for her to get. The language was another thing that wasn't very easy for her. And it took my dad quite a few years before he established himself, and from his knowledge in telephone, they started a telephone company, a very large company with subsidiaries in Haifa, Tel Aviv, and Jerusalem. And had he not died in the age of 46 with cancer, then it would have continued all the way.
Wow.
And at that time, everything, as far as the papers, I could have inherited all those things. It became very complicated story from his partners and how they dealt with it. And the only one who saved some money out of it was Uncle Moshe from Haifa. He knew how to deal with these two, with the other partners. And so this is the story now of how my dad and my mother got to Palestine, what happened to Rivka and her husband, and unfortunately we never know where they are. So when I go to the synagogue, I make a point to say Kaddish, special prayer for the people who die, every time I go for my grandparents. Although it's not by law, you can wait till a special day for Holocaust Memorial and all that, but I do it every day and every time I come. And my family then wound up in Israel, many of them relatives. They live in many, many places in Tel Aviv and in Haifa and kibbutzim. Like my uncle Walter wrote many documents. He came very early. He came to Palestine.
One sec. Thanks for sharing that part of the story. Hold on.
Right, you heard of